Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for How Your Inner Dialogue Influences Your Ability to Communicate and Build Relationships. My name is Rebecca Harkness, and I am with RH Insight. RH Insight is a consulting firm that's committed to education, training, and facilitating personal development as well as career development. With this curriculum, we dive into communication, which is so incredibly important in all aspects of life. This program is approved by the National Association of Social Workers for 2 continuing education contact hours. So let's go ahead and get started. Thank you again for taking the time to take this curriculum. We definitely appreciate it, and we're excited to share this information with you. Like I mentioned, you'll earn 2 continuing education credits for participating in this course. Now, there is one caveat. It's required by the National Association of Social Workers that you pass a post-test with 80% or better to receive credit. Now, before you panic, let me give you some additional information about this. So on this post-test, there's only 15 multiple choice questions. It'll take you less than 10 minutes to complete. I will make sure that at the end of this course, we go through a course review, so you'll be well prepared for the questions on this particular post-test. So I don't want you to have anxiety about this. It's very much a formality versus a mechanism to stress you out. So don't worry. I'll make sure that you're very, very well prepared for this, and it'll be easy breezy. So once you complete the post-test and we receive your score, assuming it's 80% or better, we'll send you a certificate of completion. If by chance, worst case scenario, you don't get 80% on your first try, you definitely have the opportunity to take the test again. If by chance you don't pass on your second try, you definitely have another opportunity to take it. What we'll do is I'll actually provide you with some additional study material so that you can review that information before taking the test a third time. But honestly, I'm confident that you won't need to even worry about that. But the support is there if you need it, and I'm happy to help in any way I can. Once we receive your score, we'll send out a certificate of completion. We'll send it to the same email address that you used when you purchased the course. If between now and then, if there's any issue with your email address, if we need to update it, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to do that. Email me at support@rhinsight.org. Okay, well, let's go ahead and dive into the material. As an overview, I'd like to touch on the 3 main concepts that we're going to go over in the next few hours. So first, we're going to dive into how your inner voice influences your communication. It's easy to discount or not pay attention to the impact and the influence that our inner thoughts, our inner voice, our self-talk has on our ability to communicate and have relationships. So we're going to go ahead and dive into that. The next piece that we'll dive into is gaining a better understanding of how your outer voice reflects your inner voice. As you better understand how your outer voice is simply a reflection of what's happening inside you, it gives you the ability to identify and change it. We can't make improvements if we're not aware of what's going on underneath the surface. So your conversations and how people receive you verbally is an immediate feedback mechanism that a lot of us don't take advantage of. So as we dive into this particular element, you'll have a better understanding of how your choice of words, your phrasing, and your thoughts establishes the foundation of your interactions. So we'll close the curriculum by diving into how to raise your awareness to this phenomenon. So better understanding the dynamic between your inner voice and your outer voice gives you the opportunity to create change through your awareness. The goal here is to give you the opportunity to create better responses in your communication patterns and therefore improving your relationships. Okay, so let's talk about this mysterious inner voice. Now, every single one of us has a voice inside our head. But the question is, what is it? Who is this person or entity that is talking to us all day long inside of our head? It interrupts conversation. It's constantly chattering and trying to get our attention. So let's talk about what actually it is. Now, our inner voice is a mechanism that brings our thoughts into our awareness. It's actually a thought communication device. It allows us to be aware of these ideas, these opinions that are percolating within our mind. It's a thought transcriber. We become aware of what we're thinking through this voice. Without this voice to communicate our thoughts or to transcribe what's really happening within our mind, we would be unaware of what we're thinking. And in those moments when we don't hear this voice inside of our mind, it's actually giving us a break. Those are the states of mind where we're in a non-judgmental observation state. We're simply observing. We're not making any judgments. Our mind is still taking in information through our five senses, but we're not formulating any immediate thoughts around it. We are simply observing what's around us, using our five senses, as well as potentially our sixth sense, our intuition. But like I mentioned, we're not making any decisions. We're not making any interpretations or conclusions about anything. We're simply taking it all in. There are no judgments being made whatsoever when we're in this state. We're actually present in the moment when this inner voice takes a break. So when we begin to make judgments or interpretations about the external information that we're taking in through our five senses, our inner voice kicks in and communicates to us in words what judgments or interpretations that we're making. Sometimes our inner voice uses also images to help with that communication. It communicates what words we're reading, what words we're listening to. Your inner voice is telling you the pictures that you're seeing, and more importantly, the meaning or the interpretation around those images. It's our means by which we can become aware of what we're thinking. Your inner voice plays a very key role in this communication and in this process of retrieving information from your mental repository where everything is stored. Your mind completes the process of analyzing, reasoning, and interpreting the stimuli or incoming information that's coming in from your five senses. Then it asks the voice to communicate the outcome to you. So we'll dive into this process and the mechanics of it, but it's important to understand overall, what is this inner voice? It's a thought communication device. It's a thought transcriber. It's an informant to your conscious self. It's bridging that gap between all the information that you store within your mind and bringing that to your awareness so that you can use it in the real world. Now, one question that you might be asking yourself is, well, what's informing my inner voice? Where is it getting the content? Now, like I mentioned, the voice is simply a communicator. It's not involved in analysis, decision making, finding meaning, coming to interpretations, or coming to conclusions. It's simply communicating the outcome of that process. It's communicating your thoughts, beliefs, and images that were a result of the analysis that was completed by other parts of your mind. As you receive external stimuli, like we've talked about in terms of your five senses, you also have the ability to create internal stimuli. As you know, we have the gift and the blessing of an imagination. We have the ability to create mental images and mental thoughts using our imagination. And those ideas, that creativity, generates what we call internal stimuli. Now, to better understand that, we'll dive into how we think and how we process information. But the key thing here, the key takeaway at this point is keep in mind that it's not all about your five senses. It's not all about what you're feeling, touching, seeing, hearing, tasting, or even your intuition. There's also another category, this internal stimuli, the use of your imagination, that creates another mechanism that informs your inner voice. Let's clarify these two channels of stimuli. So, like I mentioned, your external stimuli include your senses, your sight, your sound, the ability to smell, the ability to touch, to taste. All of these avenues create opportunities for your mind to suck up that information, whether it's the image, whether it's the smell, whether it's the touch, the taste. Your mind is storing that information in your amazing mental database or repository. And the internal stimuli are stimuli that are generated within yourself. We could put intuition in that category. Using your imagination, creating mental images, feelings that you have. We also have the ability to manipulate our feelings or create certain feelings in certain situations. We can influence our emotions, and of course, the internal stimuli of our thoughts. The ability to imagine, the ability to visualize really is a huge gift, and it allows us to significantly influence what informs our inner voice. As your mind is taking all of this stimuli in, whether it's coming from the external channel of your five senses or it's coming from your internal stimuli channel, all of this information is being stored in your mental database, also referred to as your mental repository. Another term that's often used is your subconscious mind. So the stimuli get stored within this area of your mind, and it commingles with the existing stimuli. Any existing beliefs about yourself, about the world around you, any beliefs that you have about your identity, who you are, where you're from, all of the memories that you have are stored in this area. Your personality traits, your values, the cultural socialization that you've experienced throughout your life is significantly stored within this area of your mind. Your mental database is a supercomputer. It's a supercomputer that even to this day we know very little about, but we know enough that we can begin to have influence and improve our outcomes. So your subconscious mind is also known as your programmed mind. This is the part of your mind where, because you're storing every experience, every thought, every belief, every feeling, every imagination you've ever had, every fantasy, every goal, it's not the part of your mind that is necessarily filtering this information. It's a storage device. Whenever you think about databases, you think about stored information. It's unfiltered, it's unanalyzed. It's this gigantic repository where we pull information from. So keep that in mind as we further talk about the processes of the mind and how this all comes together. So let's walk through the process of how your inner voice acts as the bridge between your subconscious mind, your mental database, and your conscious mind. It plays a very critical role in this process all day long as we work through our day. So let's take a look at it. Like I mentioned, similar to a computer, your subconscious mind has the stored information in it. All of the information that you've taken in, whether it's through external stimuli or internal stimuli, all of those bits and pieces of information are stored within that mental repository. No decision making takes place, no analysis, there's no reasoning, there's no filtering of information. It simply stores everything. And in essence, you might have heard along the way in your journey is it's very important to be aware of what information you expose yourself to. Given this phenomenon that we take in literally everything that we experience. Oftentimes I ask myself the question, why do we go see scary movies? Why do we go watch a 90-minute or 2-hour film strictly based in fear, whether it's violence, that not only generate a mental response, but they generate a physical response as well. And your supercomputer, this subconscious mind, is storing every single minute of that experience, every single minute of that emotion. The fear that you felt as you watched that movie is being stored forever. It's one of those things that people don't realize the impact that they're having on their ability to be happy, to come to reasonable conclusions through various decision making processes. That fear is information that potentially is going to affect and impact your life. It's time to be more aware of the content that you're feeding your mind. Knowing the fact that every single bit of information is stored and stays with you forever. Hopefully, that concept alone will improve your ability to make decisions and potentially filter and screen what you expose yourself to. Of course, this concept also expands to the people in your life, the people that you're spending time with. Your mind is taking in information faster than we can even comprehend at the conscious level. So choose wisely. But the point here is this subconscious mind is the house of all information that is feeding your conscious mind, which gets involved in that decision-making process. And the inner voice is the bridge. So as you make choices, as you think, as you conclude, analyze, reason, you're using your mental faculties and your spiritual nature to come to a mental outcome or a mental process. But the communication device that allows for that information from your subconscious mind to then be evaluated in your conscious mind, your inner voice plays a huge part in that. Your inner voice communicates and shares the images, the beliefs, the thoughts, the feelings, the fear that is sitting in your mental database. And of course, your conscious mind gives you an opportunity to mentally challenge and question, agree or disagree with that information. But your subconscious mind has huge impact on that decision-making process because it's feeding you the data, it's feeding you the source, it's informing your decisions. We're all familiar with the term garbage in, garbage out. Well, if you have some garbage sitting in your subconscious mind, I guarantee you that garbage is affecting your conscious decisions because it's informing them. So there's no way to separate that. The point here is to understand the role that your inner voice plays in this dynamic process. It's vocalizing within your mind these thoughts and ideas so that you can contemplate and come to a conclusion. So let's run through an example real quickly. Let's say that you're trying to decide which outfit to wear to work. You're standing in your closet. You have a decision to make. You're looking at the clothes that you have available. You're looking at your dirty laundry, recognizing what's clean, what's dirty. So your subconscious mind is going to feed you, it's going to inform this decision. So your inner voice kicks in and says, okay, let's see. So based on the stimuli, I'm seeing a black suit, a blue suit, or a gray suit. You've already worn the dark gray suit, so you've got 3 choices. And then your inner voice starts to kick in some other caveats or details. You might start thinking about, gosh, well, what meetings do I have today? Do I need to look extra good, or potentially do I have room to maybe not dress so fancy today? So you start to analyze the data, you start to analyze the potential reactions you might get from coworkers, peers, your boss, clients. All this information is being taken into consideration, and your inner voice is the mechanism to contemplate that information. So finally, you complete the analysis and your conscious mind decides, I'm going with black today. And you get dressed. So this process, this dynamic decision-making process occurs thousands of times a day. Your inner voice plays a critical role in your ability to live. Now, one thing to clarify is your inner voice doesn't verbalize every mental process that occurs in your mind and body. If it did, it would be talking so fast that we wouldn't even understand it. I mean, there are so many microprocesses that happen every second, every millisecond, that it's almost mind-blowing, actually, when you really think about it. Definitely something that we take for granted because there's so many functions that our body and mind complete habitually, or in other words, involuntarily. They're automatic. Quick example of this is our heart and our lungs. Our blood is constantly pumping. It's transferring molecules back and forth. The lungs just know what to do without being told what to do. So the point being is there's a lot of these involuntary automatic processes that exist. Now my intent is not to give you an anatomy lesson, but just to kind of remind all of us the amazing magnitude of our body and how this really works. Let's go back to our 9th grade anatomy class where we learned about the nervous system. So our nervous system, it's divided into two parts. We have the autonomic nervous system and we have the somatic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system regulates those processes that are involuntary, our heart rate, our digestion, our breathing, our pupil response. There are countless processes in our brain that are involuntary. Now, the somatic nervous system is the opposite. It provides more of that voluntary control. So one takeaway that I wanted to clarify at this point is your inner voice gets involved with those voluntary functions. This voluntary functioning includes the conscious mental processes that we go through day in and day out. So let's walk through an example to help illustrate what this process looks like. So let's say, for example, you are looking at a pencil. Well, the question is, A, how did you know it was a pencil? Well, the reason why you knew it was a pencil is because of the process that's illustrated on this slide. So let's walk through this as a simple example. So you're looking at this image of this wooden stick. You're receiving the stimuli through your 5 senses, specifically your eyes. You're seeing this image. So this image filters through your conscious mind, and your conscious mind reaches out to your subconscious mind to say, hey, do you know what this image is? And your inner voice is that mechanism. So your conscious mind points to your subconscious mind and says, hey, I don't know what this is, do you? In essence. So the subconscious mind goes through all of its data and identifies, oh, yes, you know what this is. You learned what this is back in kindergarten. It's a pencil. So then that intel, that source of information, is then communicated back to your conscious mind through your inner voice to give you that conclusion where, oh, yeah, it's a pencil. Now, isn't it amazing to think that this process happens so quickly that for us, it feels instantaneous? I mean, when you looked at that pencil, you knew immediately what it was. But in all reality, you had to figure out what it was by using this process between your conscious and your subconscious mind. You had to reach within that mental database to identify, oh yeah, I know what this is. It's a pencil. So it's pretty amazing to think about going back to our childhood and the unbelievable process of learning. I mean, when we came out of the womb, our subconscious mind was for the most part a clean canvas. Now, some could argue that it wasn't for various reasons, right? I mean, some people could argue that while you were in the womb, you started to take in stimuli from your mother, from her thoughts, from her energy. Maybe you took in stimuli from the people surrounding your mother, the emotional states that she was in. If she was under a lot of stress, that stress transpires to you in the womb. So my intent here is not to argue whether, at what point you started receiving stimuli, but it's just a little mind-blowing to think about, given the fact that as we've grown up, literally from whether it's the moment of conception or the moment of birth, wherever you want to start that starting point, it's been a constant learning process. And everything that you experienced, whether you realized it or not, started to build your subconscious mind. This amazing database, this mental repository that you were going to pull from the rest of your life. So let's walk through another example, a little more complicated to again illustrate this process. So let's pretend your son asks you to shoot hoops. Whether it's your son, your daughter, just your child, asks you to go out into the driveway and play some basketball. Well, immediately your mind goes into action in regards to how do I respond to this request? You've received this stimuli, you visually, auditorily, and now you have to respond to it. So the stimuli bumps up against your conscious mind and filters through your mental repository. Okay, so your inner voice is at work, being the bridge between these two parts of our mind. So the request comes in through this external stimuli and it begins to bump up against your mental repository. It draws upon your beliefs, some of your worries, your socialization, what it means to be a parent, what it means to be a good parent, all these social expectations of what parenting should be. And your inner voice then pulls out that information from your subconscious mind, brings it to your conscious awareness, and the process of analyzing the information begins. You might begin to ask yourself, using your inner voice, do I have time? Let's pretend you're working on a project. You ask yourself, gosh, can this work project wait? Do I have the time to go outside, spend some time with my child, and also get my work done? And then maybe some thoughts come in that indicate you're a little insecure about playing basketball because you're not very good at it. Your inner voice kicks in and says, wait a second, you kind of suck at playing basketball. Do you really want your child to know that? Will your child think less of you? So there's so many different aspects that come into play that your inner voice allows you to figure all this out, right? And a lot of it is done so quickly that many of us don't realize it. But if you take the time to be aware of the process, you'll begin to recognize what questions you're asking yourself. So your inner voice immediately reflected the beliefs, the ideas that you hold within your mind related to this current decision or this current dilemma. You have the stress of, in this example, of juggling work with being a parent, and you're experiencing the stress of that in trying to fit everything in. Well, let's say you have a belief that work has a precedence over spending time with your family, then that's going to drive your decision. You might have also a belief that you're not good at it, and you don't want to expose that to your child. Perhaps throughout this thought process, you're thinking about the fact that your dad took the time to play basketball with you in the driveway, and that was a great memory from your childhood. So all these things are happening, all these thoughts, all these considerations, which allow you to come to a decision. So your inner voice creates that mechanism, that insightful window into what's driving your decisions, what's driving your actions, and it allows you to come to a conclusion. So in this example, this parent still has a choice to make. So which choice are they going to make? Well, it just depends. They can lean towards saying no because they're trying to get their work done and they hate basketball to begin with, or they can override that idea with the value that it's important to spend time with their kids. It doesn't matter what they're doing. And hence, a conclusion is eventually made. But as you can see, as we are confronted with these decisions, or we're just confronted with the stimuli that we experience throughout the day, our inner voice, our subconscious mind, is constantly active. It's constantly feeding us information that affects our conscious mind. So it's important to understand and be familiar with this process as we begin to start talking about specifically communication. So at this point, at a high level, what we all understand is the stimuli comes in, it gets filtered in our conscious mind. Our conscious mind then makes a request to our subconscious mind using our inner voice as that bridge communicator to either tell us what the stimuli is or to help us draw a conclusion in terms of what decision to make. So this mental process occurs multiple times a day. The inner voice communicates the results to your conscious mind over and over and over again, bringing that stored information from your subconscious mind to your awareness. Now, the conscious mind can either accept the answer that it's given, or we all have the ability to question, analyze, and think it through before we reach an outcome. And as a result, that outcome then is sent back to the subconscious mind for future storage and future retrieval. So an interesting point here is this is exactly how habits are formed. So habits are formed when a behavior or a belief has been confirmed by our conscious mind so many times that when our inner voice relays it to our conscious mind, the conscious mind doesn't even question it. There's no analysis that takes place, there's no questioning, there's no doubting. In essence, the voice goes quiet and we immediately accept the information that was brought to our attention, which then again loops back to the subconscious mind and reiterates and strengthens that information that was initially brought to awareness. That's how a habit is created, but perhaps that's a subject for another day. But it's good to know how this process fits within all aspects of our life. As familiar stimuli comes into our mind, if there's already a strong established response, there isn't much to contemplate. So the mind triggers the action versus providing you the opportunity to evaluate. You react. In essence, you have formed a habit that is automatic. You've moved from a voluntary process to a perhaps involuntary process voluntarily. Think about that. That's a little bit of a mind teaser. So we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but in order to change that habit, the inner voice needs to sound the internal alarm and allow you to delay your reaction and evaluate the information before responding. That's how we change the habit, but it's that conscious, voluntary, internal alarm that the inner voice says, wait a second, I want to question why I'm doing this. But let's kind of relay this back to communication so that we can set the stage for what we're going to talk about next. So as we go back to our example of the parent with the dilemma of, gosh, should I go play basketball in the driveway with my child or not? I have a really important work project that I'm trying to get done. If the parent's inner voice had a tone of angst, of anxiety, as it was trying to come to this conclusion within their mind of, gosh, should I do this or not? That angst, that anxiety is going to translate in how the parent answers their child. So for example, let's say they came to the conclusion that, no, I can't do it right now. Well, how that conclusion is communicated has a significant impact on that relationship with that child. We've all been there. And that's the moment of truth that we're going to talk about in these future slides. How that outcome, that mental outcome, is then pushed through your mouth and communicated through your outer voice determines a lot. It's either going to go really well or it's not going to go well. So we'll dive into that shortly. Let's take a quick step back and talk for a few minutes about your mental database, also known as your subconscious mind. Like we've talked about, your mental database is the storage. It's been storing information, beliefs, thoughts, ideas, images, interactions, moods, everything since the day you were born. And like I mentioned, probably a little bit before that as well. As a child, this storage database in your mind was just hungry for information. I mean, it was a blank slate. Every single experience, every single mood, thought, emotional climate, it soaked it in, whether we realized it or not. It was a sponge just soaking in every moment of every day. It's been storing and categorizing everyone's opinion of you. As you spent time with your parents and your family, those individuals have such a huge influence on who you become because they're the people that you spend the most time with for a pretty significant part of your life, especially while your brain and personality is developing. So whether these individuals realize it or not, they're greatly impacting who you become. And also keep in mind, you were this influence as well. Not one of us lives in a vacuum. We're affected by everyone. And on the other token of that, we can impact everyone as well. That's a topic for another day. But the key thing to really realize and bring some awareness around is the fact that this storage database within your mind has been at work since day one. And it's been storing and categorizing information, but it's not necessarily truth. And that's really the main point here. As you were growing up as a child, everyone had an opinion, right? At school, at church, your siblings, they called you fat. They called you stupid. They called you not good enough. You were an idiot. You were a loser. Maybe you were one of the few that people admired and they said good things about you. That's great. Whether they were giving you compliments or tearing you down, the fact is, those thoughts and ideas made their way into your mental database as stored information. And even today, as you have to make decisions and analyze certain events, your mind is pulling from that information because it was an experience, it happened to you. We can never escape that, in essence. We can change our attitude around it, and that's how you change the past. But the fact is, that information is in there. And as we all know, kids are mean. Brothers and sisters can be relentless with teasing, bullying. Parents try and do their best, but they're humans too. Sometimes they can be overly critical of you as a child. And on the other side of that coin, of course, you're storing all the love that your parents give. You're storing all those fun experiences that you've had with your siblings growing up, whether you were laughing on a team, playing a game, those are also in there as well. The acts of love, those uplifting moments, those moments where your confidence was soaring because you put the Lego on the right way. It's all in there. So each and every one of us has a very unique blueprint. Our uniqueness is stored in this mental database. Of all the things that make us unique, this is probably the main source of differentiation because there's not one of us that has had the exact same experience, reacted the exact same way based on our personality and thoughts and ideas, and had the same outcomes. Even if you have a twin, your mental database is not the same as their mental database. So it's pretty interesting to think about this phenomenon. And I'd like to encourage you to definitely take a few minutes and think about, gosh, what's in my subconscious mind? What's in my mental database? What's the information, experiences, beliefs, ideas that are fueling and informing your thought processes? It's definitely worth the time to take a few minutes and really dive into that because that's where the magic is. If you want to create change in your life, if you want to create different experiences for yourself, you've got to change the information that is informing your decisions and your beliefs. So this mental database houses our belief systems. It houses our view of the world and also how we view ourselves. So as we go through the stages of development as a child, you'll notice that the information just keeps building on each other. The foundation is created in early childhood and it just builds. And what's interesting is because we're using the same information to inform our current decisions often reflect our past decisions. So this goes into the whole idea of how do you create change? How do you create a future that's different from your past? Well, it's tied to this particular concept. But anyways, getting back to the inner voice. So for many of us, our inner voice is being informed by this mental database, right? It's these thoughts, beliefs, experiences. And unfortunately for a lot of us, they're negative. Not one of us has had a perfect childhood. Even if you thought it was perfect, it wasn't perfect because as you go through these stages of development and your ego or personality, as it's being developed, there are certain loopholes in the experience. So there's certain times during your childhood where you're going to experience a negative outcome because you're working through the development processes of the ego. So for many of us, our parents were perhaps maybe overly critical. Perhaps they were judgmental. The fact of the matter is that if you were raised by humans, you were surrounded by imperfections and egoic challenges. You definitely weren't surrounded by perfect models of communication and reaction. We're all human. And so even the closest to perfect parent isn't going to give you that perfect experience. So this inner voice inside our head, as it's been programmed by our surroundings, the people around us, the media, your experiences, the culture, it's created this database of opinions, of a lot of potential negativity, of judgment, fear, a lack of confidence. Perhaps maybe you're overly self-critical of yourself. I mean, as I've had the opportunity to raise kids, seeing what they're exposed to through the media, especially today, smartphones, YouTube, they are being bombarded with media 24/7. This media has more power than I do as a parent. So the media that they are constantly surrounded with is very influential. And sometimes I often feel a little powerless as a parent because this media is so incredibly strong. But as a parent, I've been able to see how powerful the media is, but yet the kids don't feel like it is. Does that make sense? So the kids are just taking this in, right? I mean, they're seeing these little video clips, they're laughing at these jokes, and they have no idea that what is happening is their brain is being socialized by the culture so that it's going to inform their future decisions. It really is simply a mechanism for brainwashing. And what they're trying to do as a marketer is they're trying to take advantage of this mental database that you have because they know if they can expose you to their product enough times and you have that as part of your mental database, at some point when you're trying to make a decision, that image is going to be part of that decision-making process. For example, let's say it's a beauty product. Let's say it's a face wash. All right, so I've seen this image. I've seen this image of this face wash 10 times, not interested, I don't need it. But let's say all of a sudden one summer I have maybe a couple zits or some acne, and I'm going to panic and I'm going to think, oh my gosh, my face wash isn't working. What should I do? Well, your mental database pulls all these commercials, pulls all these images, and says, well, here's a face wash that you've seen 20 times. Why don't you give it a shot? And so we do. It really isn't rocket science. So what you need to understand in terms of your inner voice is you hear this programmed, non-intelligent messenger constantly talking to you throughout the day. You need to understand that this voice is not you. This voice is simply a communication device indicating to you what information would be helpful in either recognizing this object, making a decision, handling this situation, and it's allowing you, the real you, to take that information and make a decision. So again, I'm going to repeat, your inner voice is not you. It's programmed, it's non-intelligent, it is simply a communicator. It is following its code and communicating the information that's being presented. It's not filtering it, it's not making any judgments, it's simply presenting the information. So for a lot of us, this could be a very aha moment because sometimes we tend to put too much weight on what our inner voice is telling us. We think, oh, maybe I should do this because that's what the voice is telling me inside my head. Yeah, maybe, but you're going to want to put a little more thought into it. Bring more consciousness, bring more awareness to the process. The key takeaway here is you need to understand and take into account who or what informed this internal thought you're having. So let's go back to our childhood and let's say kids called you ugly. Let's say maybe you were not as skinny as the other kids and you got teased. Well, do you still worry about that today, even in your 20s, 30s, 40s? When you look in the mirror, do you think, oh yeah, I'm fat. Everyone's told me I'm fat. I'm fat. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I keep up with the Joneses and live up to that standard. A lot of us actually do react that way. and we identify with that criticism and we maintain that state for the rest of our life. You don't have to. You absolutely don't have to do that. So now that we better understand what this voice is inside our head, let's begin to explore how your inner voice becomes your outer voice. Let's get back to our communication subject and put together the pieces, how this voice inside our head actually influences our outer communication to the world and the people around us. So the question is, how does your inner voice reflect in your outer voice? Well, at this point, you have a pretty good understanding of how your inner voice influences your thought processes. It's the communicator, it's the bridge between your subconscious mind, that mental database, and your conscious mind, which then delivers information to the world. Like we've talked about, your inner voice is a significant influencer on your perspective, on your view of the world, and therefore it affects how you communicate and express yourself. Ultimately, how we communicate and express ourselves greatly impacts the ability to have healthy relationships, find success in our interactions, whether it be in personal life or professional life with your clients. Your inner voice drives how well you communicate, period, because your inner voice is simply reflected in your outer voice. So as you think about the thought process that we've talked about when you've got stimuli coming in, whether it's internal or external, the inner voice calls upon your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind pulls out anything that it feels like is relevant to the situation. Your inner voice allows you to use your conscious mind and play with that information. It allows you to have thoughts and express doubt. It allows you to have a little conversation with yourself as you analyze this information. Now, based on how you talk to yourself, the tone, in terms of the level of emotion that is used with your inner voice, how you talk to yourself in that process, the subtones, the emotion, those things are going to come out as you express those inner thoughts with your outer voice. So if your inner voice is centered around criticism, negativity, judgment, maybe it's doubt, maybe it's uncertainty, maybe it's confidence, maybe it's love. Whether it's positive or negative, those subtones are going to be reflected in your day-to-day communication with friends, family, patients, colleagues, clients, you name it. Your inner voice is forming the thoughts that come out of your mouth. Your mouth is simply the means by which your inner thoughts become known to the world. We put ourselves out there when we speak, right? For some of us, communication is so hard because it's scary. Our inner thoughts are exposed. We never know how people are going to react to those inner thoughts. And so for a lot of us, we have a hard time communicating. That's a subject for another day. But the idea here is to understand and have awareness around the fact that the way you talk to yourself is the same way you are going to talk to others. Even if you make the conscious decision of, oh, okay, well, it's okay if I talk to myself in a rude, demeaning, critical way. I'm not going to do that to other people. You will, trust me. You're going to have those moments where you slip up. You can't be on your A game all the time. Your automatic, your subconscious thoughts are going to come out. It's the power of habit. So I want you to start to think about and recognize the fact that your inner voice is simply reflected in your outer voice. And if you want to change how your outer voice comes across, you have to start with your inner voice. That's the only way you're going to create lasting unconscious change where you just do it by habit. So similar to how we walked through the mental processes involved with your inner voice, let's complete the cycle and illustrate how the outer voice connects it all. Okay, so let's review the process. There are two channels that stimulate our mind. One's external, one's internal. The external stimuli include your five senses, images you see, foods you taste, things you touch, things you hear, and of course, things you smell. The internal stimuli include mental images, feelings, emotion, thoughts, and these thoughts can be spurred by your imagination and your ability to visualize. These outputs of stimuli then get stored in your mental database that commingles with your beliefs, identity, memories, DNA, personality, values, socialization, etc. And as you make choices and make decisions, you use these mental faculties and your spiritual nature to reach a mental outcome. As you make choices, think, analyze, make decisions using your mental faculties and spiritual nature, these mental outcomes and processes and messages are brought to your awareness through your inner voice. It's the communicator, it's the transcriber, it's the bridge. As part of this process, the inner voice communicates and shares what images, beliefs, and thoughts are sitting in that mental database, your subconscious mind. And you're given an opportunity to mentally challenge, question, agree or disagree with the information. It's a constant dynamic process that happens so quickly a lot of the time, we don't even realize it. So your inner voice is vocalizing this internal process of analysis. Like I mentioned before, there's a lot of processes that the inner voice doesn't get involved with because there's no analysis that needs to take place. It just goes. So your inner voice vocalizes the thoughts and ideas that you're contemplating so that you can come to a conscientious decision or conclusion. It allows you to bring consciousness to an unconscious process. So the outer voice is simply a continuation of this inner process. After you reach your conclusion, you express those thoughts verbally to the world and anyone around you. The patterns of thought and common themes of your inner dialogue start to become evident in your outer dialogue because it's simply an extension of this mental process. Of course, you can choose to not share your inner thoughts, but when you do, that exposes what's happening underneath the surface. If your inner dialogue's critical, demeaning, belittling, narrow-minded, doubtful, negative, fearful, your outer dialogue will reflect that same nature. Now, on the flip side, if your inner dialogue is supportive, positive, solution-oriented, hopeful, compassionate, and optimistic, so will your outer dialogue be. And, key thing to point out here, not only will these characteristics come across in your dialogue, but also in your nonverbal communication as well. It's always interesting to hear people's perspectives when they think that their words are enough to convey a message, when 9 times out of 10, it is so obvious when their words really don't match how they feel, and you can tell through their body language. So let's take a few minutes and talk about what characteristics affect your inner and therefore your outer dialogue. So we've talked about emotions. Emotions very easily seep out through your outer voice, whether it's anger, sadness, grief, despair, depression. If we pay enough attention to each other, we can tell based on someone's use of words how they're feeling inside, or at least we can get a good sense of how they view the world. A good example of this is someone who often apologizes. To me, it's kind of a dead giveaway that within themselves, within that inner voice, there's some uncertainty. There's a lack of confidence. There's probably some self-esteem issues. Folks who have a pretty good self-esteem and good confidence, they don't walk around apologizing for anything, usually. Think of the type A people in your life. Do they walk around apologizing? I don't think so. So anyway, it's easy to see the emotions, even if they're subtle, in the outer voice. Another characteristic is safety or lack thereof. If you don't feel safe within yourself, you're going to project that lack of safety in your communication. For individuals who have to live with PTSD, whether it's chronic or acute, listen to their language, listen to their outer voice. If you spend enough time with them, you'll recognize that they have a lack of safety. You can tell in how they respond to certain situations, or they express their opinion in certain ways. You're going to see a subtone that says, I don't feel safe, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's physically, whether it's emotionally. There's going to be a lack of safety if you just listen hard enough. Another characteristic that could affect your inner and outer dialogue, criticism, judgment. A lot of us have a very hard time with this because humans are so overly critical of each other. They're simply reflecting and projecting their past criticisms that they've received. Project our emotions, we project our feelings, we project our fear and criticism and hate on others. gotta stop doing that. Be aware of how critical you are of yourself, because I guarantee you, if you are self-critical, you are probably overly critical as well to others. Another characteristic, ulterior motive. If you have an ulterior motive, that is going to come across in your dialogue. Some people might not be aware. Maybe it'll just kind of, go over their head. But if your motives are not in the right place, that will definitely come out through your outer voice. Another characteristic that will affect your outer dialogue is your desires, your wishes. Make sure that they're in line with what you really, really want. Another characteristic, of course, your pessimism. Are you pessimistic or are you optimistic? That's going to come out in your outer voice. Are you confident? Are you lacking self-esteem? That is going to be obvious in your conversations with your clients, in your personal life, etc. And of course, another characteristic is strength and weakness. Think about the past 10 conversations that you've had with different people. Can you see these various elements being played out in the conversations? Are they communicating some of their emotions that aren't necessarily part of the conversation, but they're subtones? Is there an element of safety? Are they being critical? Are they being judgmental? Are they being optimistic, pessimistic? What are the subtones that you can identify that maybe they're not directly communicating, but now that you know what to look for? It's kind of a fun game. Trust me, you'll learn a lot about people if you just pay attention to these key elements of the communication. Let's take a few minutes and talk about the dynamics of a conversation. So now that you know a little bit more in terms of what mental processes are occurring nonstop throughout your day, let's talk about how that applies to the dynamics of a conversation. So each person actually brings a whole lot of baggage to each conversation or interaction. When you begin an interaction with someone, each of you is bringing your mental database, again, that contains every belief, thought, experience, interpretation, every conclusion that you've made so far in your life is going to potentially play out in one way or another in this conversational dynamic. You're going to make judgments based on your historical judgments. You're going to make current perceptions based on your historical perceptions. So as soon as your eyes meet with this person that you're going to engage in a conversation with, this dynamic process has started. And the amount of information that's processed, it's happening so quickly, so fast, that each and every one of us take it for granted. But what's happening underneath the surface is you're immediately making judgments and conclusions based on this person's image. We all get a little frustrated when we talk about how people are judged so quickly based on their appearance. Well, in the real world, appearance does make a difference because your mind is taking in that stimuli. Whether you consider yourself a judgmental person or not, it's taking in that information and drawing conclusions. If you don't want to use the word judgment, you don't have to. But the fact of the matter is when you look at someone, your mind is forming conclusions based on what you're seeing. So if you don't want to call it a judgment, that's fine. But in all reality, you are coming to conclusions based on what you're seeing. And other people are doing the same thing to you. So your mind is drawing conclusions based on this person's appearance. The image of that person has triggered the cycle. The stimuli is being received by your conscious mind. Your inner voice is then gathering information from your subconscious mind, bringing it back into your awareness, and you're processing that information. And some of the conclusions and judgments are occurring real time. For example, your brain is telling you immediately, oh, okay, this person is a male or female. Oh, okay, this person is maybe in their 30s, 20s, 50s, determining age. Your mind is immediately drawing conclusions and judgments based on the appearance and the energy. So we got to keep that in mind. It's not necessarily all about appearance. It's about that invisible energy that comes along with us, our aura. So without realizing it, you're processing all this information. You're determining whether this person appears safe. You're determining whether this person is likable. Are they similar to you or not? How are they going to respond in this conversation? What can you expect? Your mind is going overtime in trying to figure out what this conversation is going to be like before it even has started. And it's drawing upon your past and historical data. So the conversation begins. So you've sized up each other, whether you realize it or not, and now it's time for the conversation to begin. Now, each person plays a role during this conversation, and that role changes as each person shares their thoughts and allows the other person to share theirs as well. Sometimes we interact with people and it isn't meant to be a two-way dialogue. For example, an example of this would be a parent who's reprimanding their child. The parent really doesn't allow the child to play a role in the conversation. It's very much a one-way communication. Then the conversation's over, right? I mean, as parents, we've all kind of been in that spot where it's more of a, hey, let me go ahead and tell you something, and I'm not all that interested in what you have to say or what you think about it. The fact of the matter is, even though this is a one-way communication, it's still a two-way interaction, even if only one person is talking, because you've got to have a listener, right, to have a conversation. Even if one person is doing all the talking, hopefully the other person's listening. So conversations, they're an exchange of information, verbal and nonverbal. Each person plays the role as the listener as well as the speaker at various times. It's a dynamic process where the roles change multiple times during the exchange. So each person is taking that information in, and it's being exchanged and associated with the existing data in your mind. So all the information that's part of this dialogue is being pushed up against associated data within your mental database, your subconscious mind. Now, the information either resonates with existing thoughts and beliefs that you have, or the information challenges it. So the listener needs to decide whether the information is going to be accepted or rejected. Either an agreement is going to be expressed, or potentially a disagreement or rebuttal is going to be expressed. So how one person perceives themselves affects how they receive the information. For example, if someone thinks they are a know-it-all, they already know what you're going to say, and more than likely, you are going to be wrong, whatever it is that you're talking about. Or they'll affirm that you're saying what they already knew. So it's interesting to note and be aware of how one perceives themselves is definitely going to affect how they receive your dialogue as well as interpret your dialogue. Sometimes in conversations, we want to hear a particular something so badly that we think we hear it, even though the other person didn't even say it. Our mental filter is so powerful that it can mislead us without us even knowing it. Has that ever happened to you, either as the speaker or as the listener? So what's interesting is in a conversation, within a few sentences, an emotional climate establishes itself. It doesn't take very long, and sometimes it's even before someone opens their mouth. The tone, the nonverbals immediately establish that emotional climate, which then becomes the foundation of that conversation. And the words that we choose either affirms that emotional climate, or sometimes it can disagree with it, which then allows for suspicion or mistrust to enter into the conversation, because the listener isn't going to believe the words you're saying if your tone and your nonverbals aren't consistent with what you said. So this emotional climate is key, immediately establishing that foundation. And then as your words, your phrasing begin, they have a significant impact on how your message is received, as well as it affects the flow of the information. So we'll talk in a few minutes about how certain phrases elicit certain responses and how to avoid poor phrasing. Now that you better understand the makings of how we communicate and how your inner voice drives your communications, let's dive into how to strengthen your communication through awareness and influence. As we've talked about, your inner voice equals your outer voice. So the place to start is to gain awareness around your inner voice and become more aware in regards to how you talk to yourself. What are the common themes? What are the common subtones in those conversations? This is the part of our discussion that's going to take some effort and some introspection on your part in order for this to be beneficial. So let's get started. Hopefully, you have access to a pen and paper, or you can use Word on your computer or your phone. But the idea here is you're going to want to jot down some of your thoughts as we dive into when and how you can influence your communication outcomes. Again, let's take a look at the visual of how we process information. You're going to become very familiar with this by the end of our discussion. So the stimuli comes in, regardless of whether it's internal stimuli or external stimuli. Your conscious mind works with your inner voice and your subconscious mind to process that information. As your inner voice allows you to analyze and think through the information that your subconscious mind has brought forward, you're able to draw a conclusion, which is then reinforced in your subconscious mind. So let's run through an example so that we can identify the exact location of where we, as the aware, spiritual, and conscious energy that we are, can interject and change and influence the outcome. Because the big question in this process is, where's your influence? Where is that moment of truth where you can actually use your awareness and come to perhaps a different conclusion than what your historical data in your subconscious mind would come to? That's how you create change. Now, as identified by those red arrows, this is the moment in this process that we're going to spend some time talking through, because this is it. This is the moment that allows you to become who you really want to be. And in terms of communication, really communicate the best way possible. So the stimuli has ran through your conscious mind, your inner voice has brought forward your historical data from your subconscious mind. Now it's time for your conscious analysis of that information so that you can then reach a conclusion. So it's after the inner voice has stated its conclusion where we step in. And when I say we, I'm talking about your real energy, your conscious spiritual nature. And you either affirm it or you deny it and you think through an alternative. So when we offer an alternative to what our inner voice is telling us, it not only changes the result, but it also sends back a feedback loop to your subconscious mind, that mental repository, that this conclusion that it provided was not accepted. You're taking a stand. And so depending on how strong the alternative is, it will either replace the old information or it will live alongside the historical data until that historical data gets rejected again. Now, the ego is influential here. The ego plays a significant role in guiding your personality to identify with certain thoughts, certain outcomes, and ways of communication that can make it difficult to create long-lasting change. It doesn't just roll over and die. If you take a stand once on something, well, your ego says, okay, well, we got rejected this time. I'm going to try twice as hard to make sure that that doesn't happen again. It doesn't just roll over and die when it comes to letting go of past reactions, defeating habits, negative beliefs. It fights to the death. It takes a lot of strength to overcome bad reactions, bad communication habits. I mean, we all know how hard it is to create change within ourselves. So when we try to do something different or create change, the voice in our head resists it because it's a computer program that's been programmed for years by you, by everyone around you. It isn't intelligent or analytical. It's simply following the programming. And the last thing that the ego wants you to do is to bring more awareness to ideas and bring more awareness to the moment to create alternative thoughts. The ego doesn't like change. It hates it. So when you're in this moment of influence where you're deciding within yourself, okay, am I going to accept this information, accept this belief, or am I going to change it? Your secret sauce is to ask one question. And what this question does is it brings awareness to this blind programming that's been running your life. And the one question that you need to ask yourself in these moments is, do I agree or should I change this? That's it. That question is probably the most powerful question that you will ever ask yourself. And the reality of it is, you have to ask yourself that question 100 times a day. Because every time you ask yourself that question, you're bringing awareness to your present moment. You're bringing opportunity to the fact that you can actually change your future. Again, that question is, do I agree with this or should I change it? In those moments, you're allowing the past to be questioned. You're allowing yourself to change your future. If you don't bring your awareness to what you do, the past simply continues. And not only the past, but the beliefs, the ideas, the opinions that you've accepted as truth will continue to be true. You will get the same results over and over and over. And sometimes that's a good thing, right? Because if your programming is positive, healthy, it has nurturing beliefs within your mindset, that's where habits become easy. That's where getting good results again and again and again becomes a habit, because your mental programming is aligned with those successful results. And that's the goal that we're all striving for. But in the interim, along the way, you have to ask yourself this question. Do you agree with the conclusion that your subconscious mind and your conscious mind have brought to your awareness? Or are you going to take action and question it and change it? So in your communication, if the past continues, you continue to bring the same level of skill to each and every conversation with your clients, your patients, your families, and you're in this stagnant program until you take the opportunity to take advantage of these moments of influence within your conversation. And that's how you become a better communicator and you get better results for your clients, because you have the opportunity to facilitate a better conversation. Now that we have pinpointed the exact moment of influence where you can ultimately change your outcomes and improve your conversations, let's take some time to identify some of the underlying themes that are specific to you that keep exposing themselves and how you communicate with yourself as well as others. So what I'd like you to do is ask yourself some questions and take a few minutes to identify and think through what are some of the possible themes that are affecting your conversations. Now, if it's safe, if you're not driving or operating machinery, if you want to pull out a piece of paper and divide it into two columns. One column is going to be the underlying themes of how you talk to yourself, and then the second column is going to be underlying themes in your conversations with others. Now, the fact of the matter is, like I've mentioned, because your inner voice reflects in your outer voice, really in essence, these two columns will be the same. But sometimes it's easier for individuals to separate them as they think this through, because a lot of us have this illusion that our inner themes don't come out in our conversations with other people, when in reality, I want you to realize they do. So go ahead and take a few minutes. You can go ahead and push pause, write down these themes, and let's talk about it. So to give you some food for thought in terms of some possible themes that could be floating around in your communication with yourself and others, this could include love, fear, insecurity, judgment. When you talk to yourself, are you loving with yourself? Are you judgmental? Do you have a feeling of insecurity and fear? Are you understanding with yourself? Other themes that can really be on both sides of the equation are contempt, defensiveness, limitation. Does a scarcity mindset drive your communication? How about power? Are you power seeking in your conversations? Do you often feel powerless? How about lack of self-worth, confidence, or a lack of confidence? Is there a reflective theme of optimism, pessimism, doubt, anxiety? How about guilt? This is an interesting one. Trust. Do you trust yourself as you have conversations with yourself and others? Do you have an abundant mindset that's reflective in your communication? So these are just some ideas and some questions to really get your wheels turning. What's interesting is, so your choice of words and phrasing is going to come from these subtones, because the subtones, these underlying themes, really establish the emotional climate and that foundation of your interactions. Think about the themes that are underlying your communication internally and externally, and we'll talk about words and phrasing next. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to just do some introspection and really think through what potential themes are driving your communication. As you raise your awareness, it gives you the opportunity to create change. And the whole idea here is, now that you better understand the inner workings of the processes that affect your communication, you're giving yourself the opportunity to move towards unconscious communication to mindful communication. Because your inner voice is your outer voice, it provides an immediate feedback mechanism. Now, you can argue, I don't always say outwardly what I'm thinking. Well, right, exactly. That's exactly an example of the process that we're talking about. You're consciously intervening in that moment of influence and determining, gosh, I shouldn't say that out loud. I'm going to keep that within myself. So that's a perfect illustration of what we're talking about here. Your initial reaction was to say, X, Y, and Z, but you intervened and you either said something else or you didn't say anything at all. You took that moment of influence and you decided what you were going to consciously do. That sent your subconscious mind a message, and your intervention was recorded. So the next time that you're in that situation, it's going to be a little bit easier to edit that negative emotion and edit that thought again so that it doesn't leak through your mouth and potentially damage a relationship. That's an example of mindful communication. You raised your awareness, you used that moment of influence, and you created change within yourself so that that initial reaction didn't happen, and you saved what could have potentially been a negative interaction with someone. So the question is, how do you do that all the time? How do you move from unconscious communication to mindful communication? So let's talk through some tools and some food for thought that'll get you thinking and moving in that direction. Because the whole idea here is to increase your awareness in regards to your inner voice so that you, the real you, can influence the direction of it and change its internal programming. Because the truth is, we find what we look for without fail. And our inner voice drives a lot of that because it influences our belief forming and habitual thought patterns. And then our personality comes into play as well. So it's critical that you utilize your better understanding of what your inner voice really is. And that will improve your communication patterns. So let's talk through a few things in terms of how you can raise your awareness around this voice inside your head. Well, first of all, it's very beneficial for you to figure out what emotions or feelings are driving your inner voice. If negative emotions are driving that voice inside your head, like fear, anxiety, self-doubt, or pessimism, the fact of the matter is they are holding you back from your goals. Those subtones, not only are they coming across in your communication with yourself and with others, but they're also setting the tone in terms of all your other mental processes that your inner voice is involved in terms of the analysis, the decision making. Any conclusion that you're coming to is affected by these negative emotions. So it's important to raise your awareness around what emotions are driving your inner voice. Try to pay more attention to whether you are experiencing fear or anxiety or any other type of negative emotion as you go through these mental processes within your mind. Remember, you always have the opportunity to step back and challenge the voice. The inner voice is not you. It is simply a communication device that is giving you insight into what information is being stored within your subconscious mind. Think about what is determining the underlying emotional tone and decide if you really want that guiding your life. Remember, you have the power. I know oftentimes it feels like we don't. The world makes us feel extremely powerless at times. But in all reality, every single one of us has so much power within ourselves. We just don't use it. So ask yourself this question: do you want your life guided and determined by fear, anxiety, doubt, or do you want it guided by joy, excitement, encouragement, optimism, confidence? Another question to ask yourself: do you want your communication guided by these same negative emotions, or do you want your communication to be guided by the positive ones? Let's talk about some tools and influencers that you have available to you in order to take advantage of your moment of influence. Another tactic to changing and altering the voice inside your head is to slow down your reaction time to it. Simply observe it. What this entails is shifting your energy from a reactionary energy to an observation energy. There's a necessity to create some mental space between you and your inner voice, recognizing that it's simply an informant. Again, you know this by now. It's not intelligent. It doesn't analyze the data that it brings forth to your attention. It simply is a messenger. More than likely, it could be informing you poorly. You, the real you, needs to decide that and needs to be aware of that. Have compassion for yourself, as well as the courage to stand up to the voice inside your head. I'm sure you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This definitely comes into play in terms of affecting your conversations with yourself as well as others. Just as a quick reminder, Maslow's hierarchy of needs includes basic needs, psychological needs, food, water, shelter, safety, security, and intimate relationships. Basically, Maslow's theory is if you can't take care of the basic needs, food, shelter, water, safety, then you're going to have a very difficult time getting to those psychological needs and the relationship needs that are necessary to build a healthy mindset. How this plays into your conversations with yourself is recognizing and reflecting on where by chance you sit on the hierarchy of needs. In terms of safety and security, are those subtones? If I had to create a communication pyramid using Maslow's hierarchy of need philosophy, the basic needs in terms of communication related to the subtones, related to the emotional climate within yourself. Are you compassionate with yourself? Do you lack self-esteem? Are you too self-critical? Those are the basic needs that you really need to nail down before you expand into the higher level of communication that can be reflected in your outer voice and improve the dialogue that you're having with others. In terms of safety, safety is another basic need. When it comes to communication, you have got to promote safety within yourself as well as others. As soon as you break safety or break trust within yourself or someone else that you're having a conversation with, you're done. There's nowhere to go from there except down. So if we were to focus on safety for a moment, I read a book a little while ago related to crucial conversations, and it talks about some key phrasing that you can use that really allows you to establish safety. So as you establish the emotional climate in your conversations with others as well as yourself, it's important to demonstrate this. Here's a couple tactics. So instead of starting your sentences with you, for example, you make me feel bad, or you screwed up yesterday, or you really need to change how you do X, Y, and Z. You start your sentences with I, and you say, gosh, I feel like maybe yesterday you were struggling a little bit. It sets a different tone. And what it does is it eliminates the potential dynamic that's created where the other individual is immediately put on the defensive. And we'll talk about that more in just a second. So another key phrase that you can easily implement into the conversations with yourself inside your own head, as well as others, is instead of definitively stating an opinion, start it with, I am wondering if XYZ. So let me give you an example of this. You're waiting for your teenager to come home and they're 5 minutes late. So it's 5 after their curfew and you're still waiting, and all of a sudden they come through the door. The first thing out of your mouth is going to be a crucial moment. It's either going to build trust and continue and strengthen your relationship that you have with your teenager, or it's going to reflect a power struggle and damage your relationship. So as soon as they walk through the door, you could say, you're late and I want an explanation right now. Or you could say, oh, hey, I'm wondering if we could talk through a strategy around being on time for your curfew. Completely different tone, right? So by using the phrase, I'm wondering if, especially when you're providing feedback or providing an opinion, what it does is it just softens the conversation. It softens your feedback. It creates a more welcoming atmosphere and allows the other person to think it through and not become defensive about it. Allow others to process what you're saying and explain their ideas as well. Another way to establish safety is by expressing support, really reiterating the fact that you are there to support this person. You're on the same team. It's a unified effort. There's definitely not a you versus them mentality. And those few things really go a long way. Now, again, I want to reiterate, it's not just about in your conversations with others, it's with yourself. So before you immediately self-criticize and say to yourself, wow, you're stupid, change your phrasing. Try use, gosh, I'm wondering how I can improve this skill. I'm wondering if I did X, Y, and Z, maybe I wouldn't feel so incompetent in this area. It completely changes the tone, and you deserve that more than anyone else. So in regards to safety, some of the destructive emotions that erode it include fear, power seeking, which is always ego-driven, a lack of trust, insecurity. You're probably familiar with John Gottman. John Gottman had the opportunity to do some research studies related to marriage, and he came up with what he called the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And what he was referring to are the 4 communication patterns that will absolutely devastate your marriage. Those 4 communication patterns include contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling, and criticism. So think about it for a second. Whenever you criticize anybody, what do? They become defensive. And if you criticize them often enough, they'll develop contempt towards you. It's this resentment. It's this yucky feeling that I know you're familiar with because I'm sure you've experienced it in your life, where you just can't get past it. Now, stonewalling, you're probably familiar with as well. It's a different reaction. Instead of getting defensive when you're being criticized, you completely shut down. You completely put a wall up and you're done. You're done communicating. You're done listening. Even if you're pretending to do it, you're not listening. So these are definitely 4 communication patterns that you want to avoid at all costs. And the thing is, they all revolve around criticism. If you take that one piece out of your communication pattern, then there'll be no reason for the other person to develop contempt or to become defensive or to stonewall you. They will love you like crazy. Criticism causes those reactions. And not only that, but it completely erodes safety. And like we mentioned, without safety, you don't have anything when it comes to communication. So we've talked a lot about the destructive communication drivers. We've talked a lot about what to beware of. Well, let's take a few minutes and talk about the communication drivers that you should be focusing on. Number 1, empathy. Empathy goes such a long way. Once you establish safety with an individual, empathy just builds on it. Empathy turns safety into a beautiful, blossoming tree. And as you demonstrate empathy, it's important to validate the other person. And this is an active thing. This isn't something that you can do passively. Validation is one of those things that ties into also reflective listening, where you are actively validating what the other person is saying. Now, keep in mind, validation doesn't mean you agree with everything that they're saying, but you're acknowledging what they are saying. So whether you wanted to repeat back to them what they just said to you, typically that doesn't go over too well all the time. But if you were to paraphrase it and include part of it in your response, then that not only reflects the fact that you're listening, you're acknowledging the other person, but you're also validating what they're saying as well. You're hearing them. It goes a long way. When the other individual feels like they're validated in a conversation, it just completely opens up their heart even more. And when you're in a social work setting and you're talking to clients, isn't that the goal? We want to open their heart as much as we possibly can, because the more it's open, the more healing that can take place. Another key activity in terms of a communication driver is demonstrating understanding. Now, as you'll notice, validation, reflective listening, acknowledgement, and demonstrating understanding are very much correlated, but they add a little twist for each one of those items. Because you could definitely acknowledge someone that you're listening, but it doesn't mean that you're completely understanding what they're saying. We all want to be understood, right? It's a very elementary human desire. And a lot of times we don't feel understood because A, it's hard to express ourselves, and B, the other person on the other side doesn't always understand where we're coming from. But demonstrating understanding is really getting a solid grip on where that person is coming from and acknowledging the fact that even if you don't relate to what they're describing, you know what they're going through to a certain extent. And like I said, that just opens up their heart even more for the healing to take place. So as you focus on these 5 communication drivers and add those to your repertoire of conversational dialogue, you're going to be unstoppable. Okay, wow. We've talked about a lot of things today, and I hope that a handful of these items have really resonated with you and motivated you to incorporate them into your daily dialogue. But a few key takeaways just to repeat before we close this session. Remember to take advantage of that moment of influence where your inner voice has gathered the information from your subconscious mind. Your conscious mind is giving you the opportunity to analyze that data and figure out, what are we going to do with this? Are we going to accept this information, or are we going to disagree with it and change it? Those are the moments that shape your life. They shape your success, and they shape your success in terms of how you communicate with others. At this point, you have a really good understanding of the process of how your inner voice manages and communicates the information that's being stored in your subconscious mind, brings it to your conscious mind for acceptance, denial, or revision. So take advantage of those moments of influence and raise your awareness to what your inner voice is saying. Look for the common themes and have the courage to challenge those themes. You have the opportunity to write your own story, and sometimes that involves rewriting your story. For all of us, it actually does. Rewrite your subconscious programming. That's the beauty of life. We have a huge opportunity, a huge blessing that regardless of our circumstances, regardless of what garbage we have in our subconscious mind based on our experiences and programming, we have the opportunity to alter and change it. And I consider that a true gift. Like I mentioned at the beginning, you are required to take a post-test in order to receive the credit for the 2 contact hours. But as promised, I'd like to review the information so that the post-test is very, very easy for you. So as you can see, there's a link on the slide, and this link is where the post-test lives. We use SurveyMonkey, which is very user-friendly. So each post-test will be evaluated and scored. For individuals that receive an 80% or better, we'll email you your certificate of completion and you're good to go. If by chance you don't achieve an 80% or better, we'll notify you and of course allow you to take the test again. So no worries. So if you want to go ahead and copy that link, that will take you to the post-test. I'd like to take a few minutes and review the information that you're going to be asked about on the post-test. Okay, so we talked a lot about your inner voice. What would be the definition? Well, we talked about the fact that your inner voice is a thought communication device. It's a thought transcriber, as well as an informant to your conscious self. We also talked about your senses and how your senses allow you to receive stimuli, the external stimuli. We talked about how there's two different types of stimuli. There's internal and external. Now, if you'll remember, your external stimuli include your five senses. Your internal stimuli include your feelings, your thoughts, your imagination, your ability to visualize. That's internal. Do you remember what your subconscious mind is? Well, it's your mental database that stores every experience, thought, belief, and feeling that you have. So in terms of the role that your inner voice plays, if you'll remember, your inner voice accesses the stored information from your subconscious mind. It also allows you to analyze in your conscious mind. It allows you to have that conversation with yourself and really think through things. Your subconscious mind, your mental database. Do you remember things that by chance are stored in there? Everything is. All the individuals that you've been surrounded by during your life, all their opinions, all their influences, that is in your subconscious mind. So moving from your inner voice to your outer voice, what are some of the things that affect your outer dialogue? Your emotions play a huge role in it. Whether you feel safe emotionally and physically, as well as your attitude, all those things come into play and affect your outer dialogue. We talked about the effect of inner negativity and self-doubt and how that seeps out as you communicate with your patients and your clients. And the reason why that seeps out is because your inner voice reflects your outer voice. So if you have negativity and self-doubt lingering within yourself, that's going to come out in your conversations. When is your moment of influence? This is a big deal. Now, your moment of influence is when your inner voice returns the stored information from your subconscious mind and brings it to your conscious mind to analyze and think through. That's where the real you, your energy, has the opportunity to either accept the information, deny it, reject it, or alter it. And that's the moment of influence. Okay, we talked about raising your awareness, becoming more aware of your internal communication patterns. We also talked about potential self-reflecting questions. You want to ask yourself, what emotions are driving your inner voice? Are you feeling fearful? Do you feel anxiety? Are you being too self-critical? Those are the questions that you really want to focus on as you reflect within yourself. So in closing, please take the post-test. Again, the link is www.surveymonkey.com/r/PTINNERD. I'd like to thank you sincerely for joining me today. Definitely appreciate your time and energy, and I hope that you felt like the curriculum was helpful to you in terms of giving you the opportunity to raise your awareness and improve your communication with yourself as well as others. Like I mentioned, as soon as we receive your score for the post-test, we'll email you your certificate of completion. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me at support@rhinsight.org. Again, thank you so much. We'll have more courses soon, so definitely come check us out again. Take care.